We welcome you again to another in this ongoing series of the Book of Mormon Roundtable Discussions. My name is Clyde Williams, and with me today are three of my friends and colleagues from the Department of Ancient Scripture. To my left is Keith Wilson. Thank you, Keith. And to his left is Jared Ludlow. Really grateful to have you with us, Jared. And to his left is D. Kelly Ogden. Delighted to be with you, brethren. And our topic today, of course, is Alma chapter 51 to 63, and maybe I can just kind of quickly put us in perspective and where we've been up to this point in time. Obviously, we've had wars and difficulties in Alma. We've had Amalickiah who's apostatized and taken many with him and has taken over virtually the Lamanite kingdom, and has not things have not gone so well, and so he's been filled with venom, and that's brought us to the point where we pick up things now where he's just really on the verge to come back and unleash all of his anger and venom and trying to fulfill his oath of killing and drinking the blood of Moroni. And so it's not a very pretty scene that we begin things here in chapter 51. We have, unfortunately, as you know, we've got some kingmen here who just boggles my mind, who want to become kings and take over and make the Nephite society into a kingdom. You would think they would have learned enough from Malachi's demise that this isn't the thing to do, but this puts things in a very precarious situation. And so maybe at this point it'd be a good time for us just to kind of review what's going on and why this is so precarious, how the Nephites are kind of split up, and maybe Jared, you want to help us just summarize what's really going on as far as the battlefront in these chapters, and some things that opens up for us to talk about here today as well.
Sure. We start off, with chapter 51 with Amalickiah still there and coming down, but Teancum is able to go in and kill him kind of secretly at night, and so then we're left with a new leader, his brother Ammoron, taking over. And this really, the next several chapters will kind of talk about these battles and so forth, and really it's divided kind of on two fronts. You have an eastern front and a western front, and the eastern front will initially have Ammoron as the key figure, and Moroni will come and also fight over on that eastern front with Teancum. And meanwhile, on the western front, mostly it will be Helaman and his soldiers fighting with him. And so chronologically, we have to kind of pay attention that it kind of skipped back and forth because we're jumping between these different battlefronts between the two leaders. And I guess another interesting characteristic of these chapters is occasionally we'll have letters just inserted into the text, sometimes with a little bit of dialogue, in between, but in the midst of this third-person narrative will be these first-person letters. And so we have, Moroni writing about a prisoner exchange and the response from the Lamanites, and then later Moroni writing to the chief judge Pahoran and Pahoran's response. And so it's kind of an interesting back-and-forth narrative here between direct letters and describing this war between these two fronts.
And then occasionally you'll even have Mormon as the editor, the overall editor, also kind of interjecting his thoughts, or at least summaries and things.
I'm sure somebody's mentioned in previous sessions we've had, but it doesn't hurt to bring it up again, that all of this record, it was not written for them. It's written for us in our day. And when we meet Mormon, Stormin Mormon, he was a general as well as a historian, a great historian and a prophet, but he was a general. When we meet him someday, we might want to ask, somebody might ask him, wow, why did you write so many pages of wars and all those details about wars? Kind of waste of space on those plates. It's hard engraving on the plates, you know. He's a general, and he knows that this parallels our time. Just before the coming of Christ then, just before the coming of Christ now, a time of wars, and there are lessons to be learned. So there are some great lessons in here.
Yeah, in fact, some of the revelations, the revelation prophesying the beginning of the war in the Civil War, has the phrase there, it will be the beginning of the war to end, or the war of all wars.
Yeah.
And then the latter-day prophecy, or the Savior on the Olivet Discourse, he talks about there shall be wars and rumors of wars in the last days. And so it just seems like Mormon is tailoring it for our time.
And it's also clear, we don't really deal with this at this point here, but Mormon over and over again, he's being prompted by the Lord what to put in here and direct it. I think that includes even there's some purpose here. It isn't, for me, just the fact that he was a military leader, that he liked this. In fact, he probably wished he didn't have to do this, but knowing what we would face and that it would be important, he was impressed to put it here for us.
And then his great flagship phrase, you know, and thus we see, over and over again, where he is commenting to us, the later readers, you know, lessons that we can learn from these.
Great. Well, we run into an interesting situation among all these battles with the people of Ammon, and they're, you know, because the Nephite society, with the problems from within, the kingmen who threaten to destroy from within, that's almost a greater threat than the Lamanite armies from without, and so they're in a very precarious situation, and they're feeling the difficulty because, as we remember, they've made covenants not to fight. So maybe this is a good point to begin to talk about their struggles and how they try to resolve this, and leads us to talk about some other very important portions of these chapters here. Anyone want to make a comment about those people of Ammon and the choices they're facing over here? We get to chapter 53, for example.
The Ammonites are a real significant message within the message of these wartime chapters. You remember that they were the people that were converted Lamanites, and the conversion went real deep. In fact, back in the tail end of Alma chapter 25, 26, right there, Mormon even says, once these people were converted, they were really converted. And you see part of that really surfacing now in these chapters, because part of their conversion was they were not going to fight again. They were sick of war and bloodshed and killing their fellow man, and they just said, we're not doing any more. They made an oath. And now that oath kind of comes back to bite them, because it's during a time of war, and they're being protected and sheltered by the rest of the Nephite community. But
they want to help, but
they don't want to go back on that oath.
And with some of the Nephites kind of falling away on them and not really wanting to help, they feel even more of that need to do so, because the last thing you want to do is to have this free society fall apart. And so you can see that they really do have, in a sense, a just cause, and yet Helaman's response is...
And over these years, there are 2,000 mothers who are raising some good, solid boys. Yeah.
Aren't we grateful that account's been preserved for us here?
Yes.
And as we look at these chapters, I think it'd be helpful. Let's just pick out the solution they come up with. Then, of course, is that, all right, Helaman's told us don't break this oath. It's important you keep it. And so they've got these young sons who were young enough or weren't born, either one, that haven't made that oath, and they're willing to go. And I think this isn't just the sacrifice on the part of the sons, but you think of the parent who's going to let that child, and these young men don't go, well, if I have to. And so maybe we look at what are some of the characteristics we see about these young men that made them such great. And obviously, we're going to see, as Kelly said, it's due in large measure to their mothers who have taught them. And we don't often get this window into the homes of the people. We do, in a sense, here, because they're going to tell us it's because of their mothers.
Clyde, let me just interject, even as you go to their qualities. Helaman and Mormon, kind of in concert, seem to interject a real important point here about why they shouldn't go back on their word. In chapter 53, verse 14 and 15, Helaman counsels them, don't do that. And then he says, and Helaman feared lest by so doing they should lose their souls. You know, this is about integrity.
Yeah.
And our culture is really soft on integrity in difficult places. We call it situational honesty. And this is a great place in the Book of Mormon where it amplifies something that's throughout the Book of Mormon, and that is both Lamanites and Nephites, when they give their word, they stand by it. They don't waffle. And he says he feared lest they should lose their souls. Okay, let's go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, appreciate it. It's a good point to clarify and bring
They're
up.
called, these young men called stripling. Some people may not know the use of that.
Yeah.
It's not often used, only in this context. Stripling is an English word meaning adolescent. They're young men.
Yeah, lads.
Between boys and full-blown men.
So now go ahead. A good point. And so they're at the point that I guess we look at over here in it's really clear over to chapter 56. 56, where they're put in a rather precarious position. They've had to kind of use some strategy to try to trick the Lamanites out of a city they've captured, and in the process, hoping then to draw those Lamanites after these young men who look like they're supply train, and then will come in behind another portion of the Nephite army led by Antipas in order to try to recapture the city. But either one of those two forces is going to be at great risk if the Lamanites catch them, because they'll be outnumbered, and particularly these young men. And so that's the issue where Helaman's going to say, shall we go against the battle? And of course, that's when they rehearse. Look, we didn't come here to just watch things. We come to fight, and it's because our mothers have taught us. And there in chapter 56, verse 47 and 48, they just bear testimony. It's what their mothers have taught them and the faith that they have, and we don't doubt, and we know that we're, in essence, on the Lord's
They've got
errand.
a promise they're working off of, too, sort of like a patriarchal blessing.
Yeah.
They know that they're going to be safe. They're going to be protected, just like little David, when he went down to take on big Goliath. He knew he had the power of God with him, no matter how big the big bully was.
Now, in the promise, Kelly, you're referring kind of to the Spirit conveying to them that the Lord will protect them. Is there anything that...
They will be protected as they obey. There are a couple of words that I really like in this account. Having worked now in a couple of different missionary training centers, I've heard two words often used with missionaries, and that is exact and strict. Both of those words, like in 57:21, they did obey and observe to perform every word of command with exactness. And then over in 58:40, they are strict to remember the Lord their God from day to day. Now, I don't know if those two words are real popular with youth generally in the world these days. Real strict and exact, but that's what the Lord requires of us. Those two words are in the Book of Mormon. Those two words we hear in the Holy Temple, too. The Lord expects exact obedience. There's hardly a word in our language more tragic than the word almost.
Yeah.
Almost obedient. If you almost obey, the Lord almost blesses you.
Yeah.
Huh?
And then there's no question this is part of the key with these young men, because the blessings they receive is not just because of their parents, it's because of their, as you've said, their exactness in their obedience.
They're not almost clean.
Yeah.
They're clean.
Yeah.
They're not almost honest.
And it describes
honest.
them, bear over, you said, same verse, chapter 58, verse 40, that they were, they had great faith in the prophecies, which they believed in the prophecies. They were continually keeping the commandments. They trusted in God continually. These are the kind of phrases that are being used to describe these young men, and it's no wonder.
Yeah, that concept of trusting God you see over and over again. That, I mean, Helaman is kind of left on his own with these young warriors that really don't have a lot of experience. And yet, over and over again, they could reply, that we trust in God, and they were obedient, and therefore they had his help. And they fought, as it says, with the strength of the Lord, far beyond what their mortal capabilities, I'm sure, were.
Yeah.
Good point.
Kelly, you brought up another interesting point just about your missionary service. The stripling warriors have also been used as the image for a new generation of missionaries in the church. Elder Ballard, when he gave his talk, Raising the Bar, he made specific reference. In fact, I think I have the quote here. He said, "What we need now is the greatest generation of missionaries in the history of the church. We need worthy, qualified, spiritually energized missionaries who, like Helaman's 2,000 stripling, are exceedingly valiant." for courage, and also for strength and activity. So he, in addition to this model of people that keep their word and have great faith, Elder Ballard just attached also the whole missionary preparation program to the type of people that the stripling were.
They're solid. They're firm and steadfast. Two of my favorite words in the Book of Mormon. If you're going to go into battle, you want somebody that's going to be right with you. And
it's wonderful when you think of these letters that give us this kind of information as we look at some maybe other lessons that we can draw from these chapters on warfare to apply to our personal spiritual warfare. I think still in chapter 58, you look at verse 10 and 11, where the people are, we're told, we're praying, they're pouring their souls out in prayer, that the Lord would strengthen and deliver them from their enemies. And then the results that they get in verse 11 and 12 are just, to me, profound. And it's the same kind of results that we will get and that we need, which is the Lord visited them with assurances, that He spoke peace to their souls, that He granted them great faith and hope for their deliverance, and thus they were fixed with a determination, even though they were much smaller than the opposition they faced. In a sense, we feel that today.
I really like that passage, and what I found interesting is it follows after Helaman talking about how they're not getting the physical support that they would like from the government and so forth. They're not getting reinforcements. And so what's their recourse? To pray to God and to seek help from Him, and those are the blessings that they're promised, these reassurances that, okay, they're not completely taken out of the situation yet, but He's there and He's going to help them through it.
Well, most of us are not involved in physical battle, but we are doing battle for the souls of men. And the passage says our hope in deliverance, delivered from the evils of this world, is in Him. We sing victory through Him that redeemed us.
That was our victory in premortality over the adversary, and it is again here the same victory that we'll use. And ultimately, that's what these Nephites who are faithful are fighting for too. It isn't they're fighting for their faith and their families and their testimonies of Christ that they want to maintain. And that really ultimately is what's on the line here, isn't it? And so in that sense, it's the same for us, even if we're not out wielding swords or shooting guns per se. We're definitely having to fight the opposition, aren't we?
You know, Clyde, I'd like for us to develop too this point about their mothers teaching them, and the emphasis that Mormon seems to give us on the fact nowhere else in Scripture do you have mothers kind of being pulled out and showed what demonstrated, highlighted here, and what's behind Mormons' sort of emphasis on their mothers? Because, you know, they had fathers, or at least we assume they did, unless they're off in war. But this is the one place. This is our primo Mother's Day scripture, really. And and so you know, what does it say about that?
Well, it surely seems to me that while we can't know for certain whether their fathers, it's a possibility, I guess, that some of their fathers had been among those who had been slain. Remember when 1,000 kneel down on the ground and are just slain because of their faith? That's a possibility that they've been without a father. And of course, I think it just tells us that really the mother is the nurturer in their society, and what we would like it to be in our society. At least the church would teach that. We look at the proclamation of the family.
Says it.
Yeah, and that their mothers have been teaching him while at their knee about faith and prayer, and it's the role of the mother, and that's what it's been. That's how it's been done, and it's obviously bore fruit for them, and yeah, we applaud that. We think this is so important to know that this was the key to their faith, and I think she gets to spend all that time with the children while the father's off, whether he's off working the farm or the business, whatever that would have been their societal processes. But at least that's part of it.
President Hinckley certainly spoke out frequently on the role of mothers, in his various discourses to the church. I can recall one, I have it here. I remind mothers everywhere of the sanctity of your calling. No other can adequately take your place. No responsibility is greater, no obligation more binding than that you rear in love and peace and integrity those whom you've brought into the world. And the world's changed that norm for most people.
Good point. Well, now, as we come to chapter 59, and we've got, the scenario here. Moroni has been frustrated no supplies, no reinforcements, wondering what's going on. And there's a little lesson here before we talk about the exchange of letters in chapter 59, verse 9, where he just, in commenting about their plight and the struggle because they don't have the resources and they're losing cities, he says it was easier to keep a city from falling into the hands of the Lamanites than to retake it from them. And one day that hit me, that's just exactly how it is in life. It's much easier to keep a family or a person from falling than to have to retake them. And I think of the words of President Benson when he made this statement, and I think many have heard this. He said, it's better to prepare and prevent than to repair and repent. And it really is. In cities and in lives, it's so much better if we would just take action to prepare and prevent this from happening than to then have to go out and try to pick up the pieces and reclaim, though we will do that. But it's much more costly in physical warfare, and it also can be much more costly and difficult and sometimes not successful in trying to reclaim them. So another little lesson we can apply from these war stories as well. Well, what about this letter from Moroni to Pahoran and then to Pahoran back? We learned several lessons here. Any thoughts, comments you want to share on this story?
There's definitely some strong feelings being shared.
Absolutely. This is not a love note, is it? No. that he's sending to Pahoran.
While he's the designated military commander, and while he even speaks of receiving revelation from the Lord in his functioning there, I don't think we can completely dismiss the fact that he made a mistake. Now it's with very honorable intentions. This isn't the fatal flaw in Captain Moroni. But nonetheless, I recall Elder Maxwell, he said, Moroni was not the first underinformed leader to conclude that another leader was not doing enough, nor was Pahoran's sweet, generous response to his beloved brother Moroni the last such that will be needed, and just seeing this in perspective.
The old misunderstanding between the office and the field out there, and Moroni concluding that, hey, look, if you're not going to supply us, if you're not going to stand with us, you're a traitor. That's a pretty strong word.
Well, and what Moroni has learned, indeed, there's truth to what he's been given by the Spirit, as he's back over here in verse 33 of chapter 60, where he just simply writes that the Lord saith unto me, if those whom you have appointed your governors do not repent of their sins. Well, it's governors, plural. There are plenty of these leaders who are indeed doing exactly what he's writing. It's just Pahoran doesn't have to be one of them. And he's writing, of course, Pahoran's the leader, and would thus be assumed if Pahoran hasn't handled this, he's been partly responsible. So what Moroni has been receiving is clearly that there is a problem, and there is a problem. And that it needs to be cleaned up, and that there are, as he says back here in verse 13, some righteous who've been slain because of this neglect and these problems. And the Lord allows that sometimes, so his judgments will be just upon the wicked. It just isn't going to be upon Pahoran, it's upon these others that it's going to happen to. And so I think we see this dilemma, but as you said, Keith, the response now of Pahoran is just absolutely profound. It's powerful. What a lesson for us.
Well, in fact, if you recall, in a recent general conference, it was, let's see if I have my notes there, but it was Elder Bednar who gave his talk, and the title of the talk, and nothing shall offend them. And this is how he kind of summarized one of the greatest indicators of our own spiritual maturity is revealed in how we respond to the weaknesses, the inexperience, and the potentially offensive action of others. A thing, an event, or an expression may be offensive, but you and I can choose not to be offended, and to say, with Pahoran, it mattereth not. And I just really loved the way he saw, like you said, Pahoran's, the depth of his response there.
Compliment to him, isn't it?
I mean, he knew Moroni's intention, and they're certainly on the same side as far as wanting to solve this problem. But he also realizes Moroni doesn't know how bad of a problem he's gotten into and needs his help. And
he's actually so grateful that there is a Moroni who could come to his rescue. That's the point. He says, I know you're really on the same side that I am, and thank goodness that this is the case. Otherwise, maybe all would be lost.
These are great words from Pahoran in 61:14.
Yes.
Therefore, my beloved brother Moroni, let us resist evil. And whatsoever evil we cannot resist with our words, that's first, diplomacy, with our words, yea, such as rebellions and dissensions, let us resist him with our swords.
Yeah.
So,
Which is
and he
exactly-
ends that verse with this, in the cause of our Redeemer and God, and you see that word appear over and over again in these chapters of the cause. What cause are
Yeah.
they fighting for? And you see the Lamanite cause versus the Nephite cause, whether it's revenge and bloodthirstiness, or the cause of God, the freedom, protecting families, and so forth. And over again, that word cause jumps out.
the important teaching here is that you cannot compromise with evil.
Yeah.
If you do, evil always wins.
So they come storming back and reclaim the capital and put things in order, and yet there'll be many loss of life. And we jump now, for time's sake, down to the end of our chapters here, and of course in chapter 63 we have Helaman who will die. It's in fact 62 verse 52. And Moroni will die, and I mentioned there in verse 3, he's only 43 years of age, very young man. He's literally worn out his life and given it in behalf of his people in this cause. And we've got some who are sailing off with Hagoth, for what reasons? Perhaps to escape all these conflicts, and maybe some who are leaving are the people of Ammon who don't want to have to continue to worry about breaking their oath, but they go forward. And that kind of brings us now at this point. Maybe, Jared, you could just summarize if there's a lesson in all of this that we've been talking about here that we could bring this together with.
Sure. Obviously this was a terrible time of war, a lot of conflict, a lot of suffering, and the effect it had on the people. In chapter 62, verse 41, it talks about how for the righteous they became softened because of the afflictions. For the wicked, they became even hardened. And so, you see both going through the same experience and yet having completely different results depending on whether they would turn to the Lord, seek His help, or not.
So, somebody said boiling water hardens eggs, but it softens carrots. You can have a different perspective on how the hard times that we're living in. Same.
Thank you,
are going to
brother.
affect
It's
us.
been great to discuss these with you today.